It's June 19th, 1990, and the doors of a giant white castle swing open on the Las Vegas Strip for the very first time. Turrets in blue, pink, and gold. A moat, a working drawbridge. Inside, jesters wander the casino floor, and knights joust for dinner crowds. For a few years, it's the biggest hotel on the planet. Then, slowly, quietly, the kingdom starts to crumble. So today, we're going inside the downfall of Excalibur. What happened to Vegas's medieval icon? A castle built on a dead deal. Before there was a castle, there was just 50 acres of dirt doing absolutely nothing. Back in the 1970s, a company called Xanadu Corporation owned that stretch of land at the south end of the Strip and had big plans for it. Those plans went nowhere. The county and the developer couldn't agree on how to handle sewage infrastructure for a project that size, and so the land just sat there, empty, for the better part of 2 decades. Prime real estate on one of the most famous streets in America, doing nothing but collecting dust and desert heat. Then, in May 1988, Circus Enterprises bought the land. Circus wasn't some scrappy underdog trying to make a name for itself. The company already ran the Circus casino a couple miles up the Strip, and its founder, William Bennett, had a very specific idea of who Las Vegas should be trying to attract. Not just high rollers, families, middle-class tourists who wanted a vacation, not just a card table. A month after buying the land, the company announced it, a resort themed entirely around medieval Europe, a literal castle on the Strip. Bennett and architect Veldon Simpson didn't just sketch a castle from imagination and call it a day. They actually traveled to Europe, visiting real castle sites in England and Germany, studying old renderings to figure out what would read as authentically castle to an American audience raised on fairy tales rather than actual medieval history. Neuschwanstein Castle in Germany, the one that's often cited as a partial inspiration for Disney's own castle logo, became one of the biggest visual references for the project. It's a funny bit of irony, honestly. Vegas built its castle by copying the same building Disney copied, and then spent the next 3 decades slowly copying Disney's polish right back onto it. Even the name wasn't just picked off a whiteboard. Circus ran an international Name the Castle contest, offering $25,000 to whoever came up with the winning title. That contest pulled in something like 183,000 entries. Out of all of those, Excalibur won, a nod to King Arthur's legendary sword, and honestly, about as on the nose as a name could get for a giant medieval-themed casino. The name became official on September 28, 1988. Groundbreaking happened on October 7, 1988, and construction moved fast by Vegas standards. The builders used reinforced concrete masonry, which was an unusual choice for a project this large at the time. It's a method typically avoided in high-rise construction because of earthquake concerns, but it hit the deadline, and it apparently held up just fine, because the finished structure was reportedly engineered to withstand seismic activity up to magnitude 8.6, which is a wildly overbuilt spec for a hotel whose main structural threat, 35 years later, turned out to be beige carpet. Less than 2 years after groundbreaking, on June 19, 1990, Excalibur opened its gates to the public. It cost roughly $290 million to build, and when it opened, it wasn't just another casino. It was, for a brief shining moment, the largest hotel on Earth, with more than 4,000 rooms spread across 4 towers covering around 50 acres of land. The most themed hotel on the Strip. Now, to understand why Excalibur's decline is such a strange, almost sad story, you have to understand just how committed this place was to its bit. This wasn't a casino with a few suits of armor bolted to the wall for atmosphere. This was full immersion, from the moment you crossed the drawbridge to the moment you fell asleep. Costumed staff wandered the property. Court jesters performed for tips and applause. The restaurants had names that leaned so hard into the theme, they practically groaned under the weight of their own puns. Lancelota pasta for Italian food, Sir Galahad's for prime rib. Even the buffet got in on it, originally operating as the Round Table Buffet, medieval branding included. The hotel rooms themselves were medieval-themed too, with exposed brickwork, tapestries, and artwork meant to make you feel like you'd checked into a room somewhere off a castle hallway, rather than a standard Vegas hotel tower. Then, there was the entertainment, and this is where Excalibur really separated itself from everything else on the Strip at the time. Just weeks after opening, King Arthur's tournament debuted. A full jousting show inside a 900-seat arena where you'd eat a full dinner with your bare hands, medieval style, no utensils allowed, while knights on real horses charged at each other with lances. The idea reportedly came from Circus Circus's entertainment director, Mike Hartzell, who'd seen a similar dinner show called Medieval Times out in Los Angeles, and figured Vegas needed its own version. Bigger, of course, because everything in Vegas has to be bigger. The show ran for roughly 6,000 performances before closing in January 1999, and it came back the very next month with a new name, Tournament of Kings, featuring an updated script and a more modern set. It's still running today, and it's technically the longest-running dinner show on the entire Strip. Here's a genuinely strange fact to go with it. Excalibur has reportedly served more than 15 million Cornish game hens in that arena since 1990, which apparently makes it the single largest purchaser of Cornish game hens in the entire United States. Somewhere out there, a poultry farmer owes his entire business to King Arthur. Outside, in the moat surrounding the castle, guests could catch the dragon battle, a 71-foot animatronic dragon that would rise up out of the water and fight the wizard Merlin in a show that ran on the hour, pulling crowds not unlike the volcano show that used to draw people to the Mirage next door. It debuted around 1993, and it was, by most accounts, an absolute spectacle. It was also, according to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, bad enough to win their Worst Attraction award not once, but twice. The dragon finally stopped fighting for good in 2004, a casualty of both cost and, presumably, dignity. Inside, there was the Fun Dungeon, a sprawling arcade. You literally walked down a staircase to get to it, hence the name, with more than 200 games, including redemption machines where kids could trade tickets for prizes like plush dragons, appropriately smaller and less structurally ambitious than the one that used to live in the moat. Excalibur wasn't just a hotel with a casino attached. It was closer to a theme park with a casino stapled to the middle of it, and for a family-focused strategy that Las Vegas hadn't really tried at this scale before, it worked. David Schwartz, who directs the Gaming Research Center at UNLV, has pointed out that Excalibur was part of a real shift in how the Strip tried to sell itself, moving away from the adults-only, mob-era reputation Vegas had carried for decades and towards something you could bring your kids to. The kingdom grows a few unmedieval rooms. Here's the thing about running a theme for 35 years. Eventually, you start adding things that have absolutely nothing to do with the theme, because the theme alone stops paying the bills. And Excalibur did this early, and it did it often. In 2002, Thunder from Down Under moved in, a male revue featuring a rotating cast of Australian dancers, acrobats, and gymnasts, performing in the Thunderland showroom on the second floor. It is, today, the longest-running male revue on the Strip, and it shares that same showroom with the Australian Bee Gees, a tribute act, and the Mac King Comedy Magic Show, a family-friendly magic act that somehow coexists on the same marquee as a bachelorette party staple built around chiseled Australian men in very little clothing. None of this is medieval. None of it is even trying to be medieval. It's just good business. And Excalibur, whatever else you want to say about it, has generally been pretty good at booking whatever actually sells tickets. Around the same period, the property leaned into an insult restaurant concept with Dick's Last Resort, a place built entirely around abrasive, mean-spirited service as the entertainment, a concept about as far removed from chivalry and courtly manners as you can possibly get inside a castle. There was, for a while, even a wrestling-themed restaurant on property, another sign that Excalibur's identity was drifting from medieval kingdom toward whatever Vegas tourists happened to be into this decade. The Round Table Buffet eventually got rebranded and redesigned too, dropping much of its medieval branding in favor of a more generic multi-station layout split into American, Italian, Asian, Latin, and dessert sections, food courts by way of the United Nations, rather than anything you'd find at a Renaissance fair. None of these additions killed the castle by themselves. If anything, they kept it financially afloat while the rest of the Strip left theme parks behind for infinity pools. But each one was a small admission that the pure, unbroken medieval fantasy from 1990 wasn't quite enough to carry the property on its own anymore. And that pattern of quiet compromise is really the whole story of Excalibur in miniature, decades before anyone started talking about a downfall at all. It's worth noting, too, that most of these editions have stuck around far longer than a lot of Excalibur's original medieval offerings. Thunder from Down Under has been running continuously since 2002, longer than the second, remodeled version of the jousting show has existed in its current form. In a strange way, the un-medieval side hustles turned out to be more durable than a fair amount of the medieval theme they were supposedly propping up. The crown slips fast. Here's the thing about being the biggest hotel in the world. It's a title you can only hold until somebody builds something bigger. And in Excalibur's case, that didn't take long at all. Just 3 years after opening, in 1993, MGM Grand opened directly across the intersection from Excalibur, literally within sight of the castle's towers, and took the world's largest hotel crown right off Excalibur's head. 3 years. That's it. That's how long Excalibur got to hold on to the title that had defined its opening headlines. And it wasn't just about room count. The entire philosophy of the Strip was shifting underneath Excalibur's feet, and shifting fast. The Mirage had opened in late 1989, just months before Excalibur, and it set off what became a full decade of mega-resort construction. Luxor, Treasure Island, the aforementioned MGM Grand, New York, and eventually Bellagio, the Venetian, and Paris, Las Vegas. Some of these were themed, sure, but the trajectory of the Strip was bending towards something Excalibur hadn't been built for. Luxury, sophistication, high-end dining, high thread count sheets, art collections in the lobby. Bellagio, when it opened in 1998 under Steve Wynn, was reportedly the most expensive resort ever built at the time, and it represented almost the exact opposite instinct from what Excalibur had been chasing less than a decade earlier. Where Excalibur said, "Come have fun with your kids," Bellagio said, "Come feel rich." And Vegas, as a whole, quietly decided it liked the second pitch better. Excalibur, meanwhile, was stuck being exactly what it was built to be, a big, loud, family-friendly castle, in a Strip that increasingly didn't want families and loud anymore. It wanted whales, high rollers, bottle service, and fountains choreographed to orchestral music. By 2009, Excalibur had slipped to only the 5th largest hotel in Las Vegas by room count, and today, even with nearly 4,000 rooms, it doesn't crack the top handful of properties on the Strip anymore. It's still one of the biggest hotels on the planet in absolute terms, reportedly still ranking somewhere around 14th largest globally, which tells you less about Excalibur shrinking and more about just how enormous the newer generation of Vegas resorts got. New owners, new priorities. In 2005, MGM Resorts International purchased Circus Enterprises, and with that acquisition, Excalibur changed hands. It wasn't an isolated purchase. MGM was consolidating a huge chunk of the Strip under one corporate roof, and Excalibur became just one property among a growing portfolio that included some of the very resorts that had helped make its own theme feel outdated in the first place. Imagine getting bought out by the company whose other hotels are the reason you look old-fashioned. That consolidation actually ended up mattering a lot for how Excalibur gets treated day to day, even now. MGM's South Strip cluster eventually grew to include Mandalay Bay, Luxor, New York, and the MGM Grand, all connected by walkways and that free tram system, all competing for the same general pool of guests. Inside a lineup like that, a company has to decide which property plays which role, and Excalibur, more or less by default, became the value option. The one you book when you want to be near the cluster without paying cluster prices. That's not necessarily a demotion. It's a job, and Excalibur has kept doing it reliably for 2 decades, even as the theme around it got quieter. And it didn't take long for the new ownership to start making changes. In 2006, Excalibur went through a significant remodel, and this is really where the slow erosion of the medieval icon identity begins in earnest. The exposed brickwork, the tapestries, the castle-themed artwork in the guest rooms, all of that got stripped out and replaced with a much more neutral, understated hotel room design. Nothing wrong with the new rooms, necessarily. They were probably more comfortable, but they could have belonged to almost any mid-tier hotel in America. The specific magic of "you are sleeping inside a castle" was gone, replaced by the specific magic of "you are sleeping inside a hotel." The pool area shut down in November 2006 for what was described at the time as an extensive redevelopment. Around the same period, some of the food and beverage lineup shifted too. Older venues like the Nitro Grill closed out in favor of newer concepts. Piece by piece, the parts of Excalibur that made it Excalibur, not just a casino, but a themed experience, started getting quietly replaced with things that looked like every other renovated casino on the Strip. A second renovation pass followed in 2014, continuing the same basic direction: modernize, neutralize, and try not to think too hard about the drawbridge outside. And Excalibur wasn't alone in this. Around the same period, a broader pattern emerged across Las Vegas. Operators started stripping the theme out of themed hotels entirely. The Luxor toned down its Egyptian motifs. New York dimmed its recreated skyline lighting. Treasure Island literally sold off its pirate ship signage to a sign museum. Industry watchers at the time started asking, somewhat sarcastically, how exactly you take the Egypt out of a pyramid, or the New York out of New York, and by extension, whether operators would eventually try to take the medieval out of the castle too. Excalibur's answer, it turns out, was partially, and only where the guests couldn't see it from the Strip. What's left of the kingdom? So here's where things stand today, decades removed from that grand opening. And the honest answer is, it's complicated. The exterior is still there, and it's still genuinely striking. The turrets, the moat, the drawbridge you walk across to enter, all of that survives, and lit up at night, Excalibur still looks like nothing else on the Strip. Maintaining those bright turret colors isn't cheap either. They reportedly need repainting with polyurethane paint every 3 or 4 years just to survive the desert sun without fading into something closer to sandstone. Inside the casino, a lot of the medieval theming holds on too. The stone-look archways, the stained glass, the circular turret shapes worked into the architecture, the battlements running along the upper walkways. If you stick to the casino floor and the entrance, you could reasonably think the castle's doing just fine. Walk up to the guest room floors, though, and the story changes. Multiple recent hotel reviews describe rooms that feel less like they belong to a themed resort and more like leftover furniture from other MGM property renovations got shipped over and installed with minimal effort. One reviewer for The Points Guy put it bluntly, writing that the theme pretty much ended in the hallway, describing the rooms as feeling like a hodgepodge pulled from other hotel bankruptcies rather than anything resembling a coordinated design. A guest reviewer on TripAdvisor made a similar point a bit more gently, saying the property was less medieval than medieval times, and that it needed renovation for more atmospheric medieval ambiance. Which, if you think about it, is a fairly damning thing to say about a hotel whose entire reason for existing was supposed to be atmosphere. Even the once signature dragon battle, gone since 2004, only lives on now in old photographs and the memories of people who took their kids to see it in the 90s. What Excalibur has settled into, essentially, is a budget property. And to be fair, that's not automatically an insult. It's actually become the property's whole identity, and, arguably, its saving grace. Rooms are cheap by Strip standards. There are $3 margaritas, $5 blackjack tables, and dining deals scattered around venues like Tap Sports Bar. 4 pools dot the property, along with some of the most affordable cabanas on the entire Strip. The food court still leans budget and familiar rather than upscale, with the likes of Johnny Rockets, Popeyes, Auntie Anne's, Krispy Kreme, and Pizza Hut Express. Comfort food, not culinary tourism. There's even a free tram out front that connects to Mandalay Bay, with a transfer point there to reach Luxor, so guests can hop between 3 resorts without ever stepping onto the actual Strip sidewalk. It's positioned itself as the place you stay when you want to be on the Strip, near the airport, walkable to Luxor and New York, without paying resort prices that have crept toward outright absurd elsewhere on the boulevard. Michael Green, a history professor at UNLV, has actually called Excalibur underrated in this exact context, pointing out that in a city where a $500 a night room has become almost normal at the newer resorts, cheaper, accessible properties like Excalibur still serve a real purpose in keeping Las Vegas's overall visitor numbers from stalling out. It's not glamorous. Nobody's writing breathless travel magazine spreads about the Excalibur guest room experience in the year 2026, but it's full, most nights. And full beats empty in the hotel business every single time. Getting lost in the castle. One thing longtime visitors still bring up, decades in, is that Excalibur is genuinely confusing to walk through, and it has nothing to do with medieval sorcery. The castle runs on 2 main levels that don't line up the way most people expect. The upper level, sometimes called the Castle Walk, holds a roughly 20,000 square foot food court. The shops, the Tournament of Kings Arena, and the indoor walkway over to Luxor. The casino floor, hotel registration, and most of the bars sit one full level below that, fed by the strip-side entrance with the moat and drawbridge. So if you walk in from the strip, the casino's right there, and the food court is above you. If you come in off the Luxor walkway instead, you land on the food court level, and the casino's underneath you. Most people who think they're lost in Excalibur aren't actually lost. They've just entered on the wrong floor for whatever they were looking for, and the castle theming, charming as it is, does absolutely nothing to help you find a staircase. Parking has its own quiet history too. Self-parking sits in a covered garage toward the rear of the property, built out in the 2000s with roughly 3,000 spaces, finished in translucent gold and brown mesh panels designed to blend with the castle's exterior color scheme and cut down on solar heat at the same time. It's a genuinely practical piece of architecture hiding behind the same aesthetic playbook as the turrets out front. Proof that even the parts of Excalibur nobody photographs for postcards still got the theme treatment, at least on the outside. Why nobody's imploded it? Which raises an obvious question. If the theme has faded, if the rooms have gone generic, if it lost its world's largest bragging rights over 3 decades ago, why is Excalibur still standing at all? Las Vegas has never been shy about dynamite. The Dunes came down in 1993 to make way for Bellagio. The Stardust came down in 2007. As recently as October 2024, the Tropicana, Excalibur's neighbor just across the strip, got imploded entirely to clear space for a baseball stadium. The likeliest answer is just math. Excalibur isn't trying to compete with Bellagio or the Venetian for the luxury traveler, and it doesn't need to. It's filling a different role in MGM's portfolio entirely. The budget option that keeps rooms full, even when someone can't justify strip luxury pricing. And that steady occupancy is worth more sitting there generating revenue than it would be as an empty lot waiting for the next multi-billion-dollar mega resort to get financed and built. Ownership has technically changed hands again since MGM's 2005 purchase, too. The property, along with several other MGM assets, was transferred to MGM Growth Properties in 2016, and then in 2022, Vici Properties acquired MGM Growth's holdings entirely. MGM Resorts still operates Excalibur day-to-day, they just lease the real estate underneath it now. But through all of that corporate reshuffling, nobody has pulled the trigger on demolition, probably because there's never been a clear financial case for tearing down a property that, castle theme or not, is still consistently profitable at its price point. There have been some more recent efforts to freshen things up rather than erase what's left entirely. Excalibur's resort tower has been marketed in the past couple of years with updated furnishings, some of it reportedly inherited from renovations happening at other MGM properties, like the main MGM Grand Tower. Mobile check-in and digital room keys through the MGM app have replaced some of the old front desk lines, and the casino floor, by most current accounts, is still thick with medieval theming, even if the resort fee and taxes on top of your newly renovated room remind you pretty quickly that you're staying somewhere owned by a modern hospitality conglomerate rather than an actual Arthurian court. It's a modest refresh rather than a full theme restoration, but it suggests the property isn't being left to rot completely. It's just being maintained at exactly the level its budget positioning requires, no more, no less. The castle that refused to fully fall. There's something almost fitting about how Excalibur's story has played out. It never had the dramatic ending you'd expect from a Vegas cautionary tale. No bankruptcy, no implosion footage set to dramatic music, no headline-grabbing collapse. Instead, it just slowly, quietly got less medieval, one remodel at a time, while the strip around it chased a completely different idea of what luxury should look like. And yet the castle's still there. The drawbridge still comes down every day. The turrets still catch the light at night, even if the rooms behind them look like they could belong to a Best Western in Ohio. Excalibur didn't get torn down by wrecking balls or corporate abandonment. It got worn down by 3+ decades of budget renovations and a strip that simply moved on to a different fantasy, one involving Michelin stars and infinity pools instead of jesters and jousting. Whether that counts as a downfall or just a very long, very slow negotiation with reality probably depends on who you ask. Ask the family who's stayed there every summer since the 90s, and they'll probably tell you it's still magic. Ask someone who remembers the exposed brick and the animatronic dragon, And they might tell you a piece of Vegas history got quietly sanded down for the sake of a cheaper thread count. Either version is fair. Excalibur was never actually a castle after all. It was always a business wearing a castle's clothes, and businesses, unlike kingdoms, don't get to stay frozen in time just because the theme was good once. Either way, the castle's still standing on the Strip, 35 years and counting, still serving Cornish hens by the millions, still charging $3 for a margarita, still letting jesters and Australian dancers share a marquee like it's the most normal thing in the world. Whether it stays that way is anyone's guess. Las Vegas has a well-documented habit of eventually blowing up anything that stops paying its way, and Excalibur has spent 35 years proving, quarter after quarter, that a cheap room with a castle attached is still exactly what a huge number of people want when they land at Harry Reid International, looking for a place to sleep between casino floors. That's not nothing. In a city built almost entirely on reinvention, just staying open, staying full, and staying recognizable from a mile down the Strip might be its own quiet kind of survival. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the rise and fade of one of the Strip's strangest icons, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories like it. We've got plenty more Vegas history where this came from.